Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another HR Fridays with Clint Indrell, Managing Director of On Demand HR. Hope you've all had a great week. Once again, we have a specific topic for all our viewers every single week. Let us know of any topics of interest. Please let us know any comments about today's presentation. We're happy to discuss your queries and answer them as we go. Interact with us in relation to these sessions. The more interaction we get, the better. The whole purpose of this HR Fridays every week is trying to provide advice which is based on reality. We've been in the Fair Work Commission many times. We've done many workplace investigations. We've dealt with the Fair Work Ombudsman many times. This allows us to provide real perspective, not just theory and scare tactics that you may hear from other providers or other consultants. So for those who want more information about provision of our services, www.ondemandhr.com.au. Today's topic is going to be about workplace bullying, harassment, and discrimination. So we're going to cover a few things in relation to these topics, very topical things, things that regularly come up in workplaces, have been the subject of many of our workplace investigations over the years. On Demand HR has also got a fantastic training product that we are rolling out to our clients recently. And the one thing I'll say about training in general in relation to workplace bullying and harassment, you hear a lot about what complaints are and why you should make a complaint and when to make a complaint and all of these sorts of things. And a lot of the training I find really focuses on complaint, encouraging almost people to make complaints. Well, what we provide is quite different. We actually provide quite balanced training, and our training really goes into situations where you might consider making a complaint, situations where you might consider taking self-action, speaking to the individuals involved, and situations where that don't simply constitute workplace bullying and discrimination or harassment at all. So today's presentation, I really want to get focused on the basics, so just the definitions and the simple things that are workplace bullying and harassment and discrimination, and also the things that are commonly mistaken. So we'll get straight into the presentation today. So we'll talk about workplace bullying first of all, which is probably around about 80% of the various complaints that we deal with. So this seems to be the most topical one. And basically workplace bullying is, as defined by the Fair Work Act, repeated unreasonable behaviour directed towards a worker or group of workers whilst at work. The behaviour must create an ongoing risk to health and safety, and there must be a risk that the behaviour is likely to continue. So the sorts of things that we find that could potentially be deemed as workplace bullying are things like aggressive, intimidating or humiliating conduct or comments, teasing, practical jokes or initiations, unreasonable exclusion from work-related events, spreading malicious rumours, and unreasonable work expectations. So we see a lot of complaints along these sorts of lines over the years. The one thing we do also see very, very commonly is situations where employees are being managed by their managers because of, poor performance, poor conduct, poor behaviour, whatever it may be. And as a response to that, a complaint is made against the manager. So my general view of those type of complaints is that normally that is a pretty weak starting point for a complaint, that if a person's been subject to disciplinary action and that has happened for some time, and then not as a result, but following that, a complaint's made against the manager, typically what you will find is, one, the motivation for the complaint is often because the person simply doesn't like being managed. And second of all, there's a pretty good chance that whatever the conduct that is alleged in those situations, obviously depending on circumstances, may not constitute workplace bullying. So that's a common mistake we see in the mind of complainants. And we are seeing a lot of complainants, to be fair, that are simply using complaints as a vehicle to avoiding, basically performance management or being disciplined on their unsatisfactory conduct. So that is something we are seeing. Particularly, I think this has become more of a generational thing, that people just don't accept criticism or feedback as well as perhaps they used to. And we're seeing this prevalent in a lot more workplace situations. So we might just leave the workplace bullying part of it there. Let's move on to discrimination very quickly. So discrimination is when a person is treated differently as a result of one or more of the following protected attributes. And I want you to focus on only the blue parts of this particular slide. So you've got about 12 different things there: race, color, sex, age, disability, marital status, and a range of other ones. And it's important to know that in order for something to be discrimination, it must be based on a prohibited ground. So, in order to make a complaint, which is a discrimination complaint, and for it to be even considered to be valid or worth investigating, there must be an allegation that one of these things is the reason that person has been discriminated against. And typically we see discrimination in either hiring decisions, people not being promoted, potential conduct towards a person in the workplace that they might say is as a result of a particular attribute. Typically on this list, if I look at the 12 that come up, probably the most common ones, interestingly, are ones around pregnancy. We see that quite a bit coming up. We see sometimes around age or sex. Those tend to be the top three, I would say. Surprisingly, race and colour discrimination complaints, just from our experience, are not actually that common. We don't actually see a lot of allegations of discrimination on those grounds. We sometimes see disability ones as well. So it's probably age, pregnancy, sex, and disability. They're probably the top four. And then the other ones, to a lesser extent, we don't actually see that many on religion, to be quite honest. Not that many on political opinion, those sorts of things. Marital status, we've got a couple of those, but generally quite rare. The reason I put four more down the bottom in red is because these are actually potential grounds that an employer might discriminate on, but are not necessarily unlawful. So we've actually got some clients that refuse to hire people because they are smokers. Now, some people might think that is, very unfair, but others might form the view, well, smokers take more breaks, generally unhealthier, and whether those views are valid or not, they're not one of the protected attributes that's in the blue column. So simply not hiring someone or not promoting someone or making a decision on something based on a person being a smoker, that's not an illegal form of discrimination. Same with respect to things like driver's license. If someone applies for a role, they don't have transport, or they don't have a driver's license to carry out the role, well, they simply don't have the required attributes. So that would be a fairly reasonable and lawful basis for discrimination. If you've got a customer service position and you need certain level of communication skills in order to deliver in that particular role, that would be another one where it'd be quite reasonable to discriminate against someone based on the level of communication skills they have. And there's a number of other situations where a person might not be able to perform the key requirements of the job, and as a result, inadvertently they're being discriminated against in that selection process. So that's just some examples of some quite lawful and quite reasonable discriminatory grounds, remembering that the unlawful ones are only in the blue column. So let's continue with sexual harassment. So this is one that comes up from time to time. Interestingly, in the complaints we deal with, not as common as you think. I mean, as I said earlier in the presentation, 80% or more of our complaints that we deal with are generally workplace bullying, and probably discrimination, fraud, and sexual harassment probably makes up the remaining 15 to 20% of those complaints. So sexual harassment, first of all, by definition, is unwelcome sexual conduct which makes a person feel offended, humiliated, and or intimidated, and where that reaction is reasonable in all of the circumstances. It does not include sexual interaction, flirtation, attraction, or friendship which is invited, mutual, consensual, or reciprocated. So yes, so we sometimes see this. The common ones we see in terms of matters that are generally investigated are around comments. We don't generally see that many that are in terms of touching or, things where there's been, touching or groping. You occasionally get those ones, but those are the kind of probably the more serious end sexual harassment complaints. Generally, the ones that are grey areas are around things like comments, jokes. Sometimes as well, you have a situation where there is a degree of, it might be mutual flirtation, interaction at some point, and then that turns and changes into those things not being mutual or reciprocated anymore. So that's a common one that we sometimes get. We also see ones from time to time in, SMS messages or Facebook messages and things like that, where parties are communicating in a certain way outside of work. Obviously, this brings a broader question about how you should use social media and interacting with colleagues at work. If you're connecting with people on Facebook, on LinkedIn, well, then what invitation does that provide to have conversations that are not of, a strict work nature? A very tough line there, and a very grey area to consider in how you're dealing with these particular things. So that's a bit about really sexual harassment and what it is. And typically, those are the sorts of common complaints that we see in that regard. So I guess really the message out of today's presentation, more than anything else, is I think it's very important for all of your employees, first of all, to understand these three concepts. And we recommend that in one of two ways. We recommend, first of all, as an absolute fundamental, that you obviously have, appropriate policies and procedures to define these things and make it clear to employees what behaviours are acceptable and unacceptable in these particular areas. The second thing, though, we are now recommending to our clients is to conduct workplace bullying, discrimination, and sexual harassment training. We actually are offering a new product to on-demand HR clients and anyone else who may be interested for a very nominal fee. And basically, it is a very affordable fee per person. Why this is preferable to face-to-face facilitators is obviously with face-to-face facilitators, every time you get a new person, effectively, you're going to have to bring out a facilitator in a few months to deal with that person again, or to train new people, and you're going to have regular turnover. The good thing about our product is that it can be sort of turned on when you need it. You can obviously buy a number of subscriptions in bulk, use them as you see fit, and obviously add on new starters as you see fit as well. Importantly, our training will go into areas such as taking self-action. So automatically people think, oh, well, if I've got a complaint or if I've got a problem, I just have to make a complaint and that's the way to fix it. What we try and encourage employees is, where it's appropriate, to actually confront the individual who was responsible for the behavior which you were dissatisfied with. And what that actually can do sometimes is give you a better long-term result. Making a complaint often leads to a formal process, either conducted internally or externally, can make parties feel very, very uncomfortable. And sometimes the parties don't get the outcomes they want anyway. So often taking self-action, just telling someone that you are offended or not happy with the way they have been behaving towards you, is actually better received than actually making a complaint in first instance. Now, sometimes that's not appropriate. You do need to escalate these things depending upon the severity and so on, but don't discount taking self-action. The second thing that we'd like to also communicate to employees of clients is situations where they might feel unhappy or uncomfortable, but are not workplace bullying, discrimination, and sexual harassment. And these are common things like if they're being managed in relation to their performance, if they disagree with the performance management. Just because you disagree with a manager's view on your performance doesn't make that workplace bullying and harassment. At the end of the day, your manager's view of your performance and your view might be different, but ultimately, the manager, if they communicate that your performance is unacceptable or not to the required standards, then that doesn't constitute workplace bullying and harassment. And you're probably wasting your time, frankly, making a complaint about those things. And in my experience, those types of complaints generally lead nowhere and are generally unsubstantiated when you conduct a formal investigation. Obviously, look, if you've got a matter that is very serious and you want an external person to conduct an investigation, you can also contact On-Demand HR in relation to those services. I think that's pretty much a wrap for workplace bullying, discrimination, and sexual harassment today. So if anyone's got any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment box, and we're happy to reach out to you at another time. Feel free to refer this video onto your friends or professional colleagues for them to have a look at. Once again, thank you very much for joining us this Friday at HR Fridays. My name is Clint, Managing Director of On-Demand HR. Once again, our website, www.ondemandhr.com.au. Have a great weekend, everyone. And once again, it's goodbye for now.